Hello, my name is Richard Millward from the School of Computer Science and Statistics in Trinity College Dublin.
And I am Elizabeth Oldham from the School of Mathematics in Trinity College Dublin. We're both honoured to be presenting at this conference.
Elizabeth and I have both spent many years in educational computing. I have worked in the United Kingdom, specifically in England, and Elizabeth in Ireland. We have been interested in approaches to the school subject of computer science for much of our working lives. This keynote will begin by explaining the recent events in England and Ireland in relation to computer science, and then tell some of the history of computing in schools since the early days of the 70s. Finally, we will explain some of the problems that have occurred in schools as technology and society have developed since then.
It may be important to clarify our terms and the scope of our presentation. We are talking about computer science as opposed to a different curricular subject called, say, ICT or information technology, and also as distinct from using digital technology in teaching and learning. We are talking in the context of issues such as, should such a subject be introduced? If so, under what conditions can it be introduced and sustained? Our experiences in England and Ireland provide case studies.
Between 2000 and 2010, there was a decline in the take-up of computer science in schools, leading to concerns that the UK economy might suffer from a lack of competent employees. The British Computer Society, with others, campaigned for a new subject of computing to be established, which would focus more strongly on programming and computer science than the established ICT subject, which was concerned with a broader curriculum related to computer applications. In 2008, a grassroots organisation called Computing at School was formed to argue this case, establishing an online community and recruiting rather well to now boast 28,000 registered members in October 2017. The ICT qualification was perhaps unkindly considered by some as not rigorous, permitting a low level of intellectual engagement, and asking students to simply learn to operate Office applications, and thus not meeting industry demands for competent programmers and analysts. Ultimately, a national curriculum for age 5 to 18, leading to a computing qualifications for age 16 and 18, was introduced in 2013, eventually replacing ICT, which was phased out in 2016.
The developments in the Republic of Ireland started rather later and are less clearly sequential. They're best described by looking at the drivers of policy in the area. At the level of policy making, these drivers are chiefly economic, providing computer science graduates and those in allied areas who would work in the knowledge industry. The sector has burgeoned in Ireland, but the supply of young candidates for the jobs is insufficient. Support for computing in schools also comes from the third level sector, that is, the universities and institutes of technology and so forth. They are looking for entrants who are not only suitably qualified, but also suitably informed, realizing that there is much more to computing than using computers, especially for applications, packages, and browsing on the web. A third constituency is that of parents, and you see some statistics about parents' views on the slide. The motivation may again be chiefly economic. It would be pleasant, but probably unrealistic, to give equal weight to student interests. However, the Coder Dojo movement, which started in Ireland and allows children to engage in coding in areas that interest them, has been a notable phenomenon since it started in 2011. The support on educational grounds for a subject that allows at least some students to develop problem-solving skills and express their creativity has been less prominent, notably in the media, but within the education sector this aspect has, of course, been important and is considered below. Unlike in England, the reaction has not been uniform system-wide. It is worth noting that there was no mainstream ICT course in place, so the issue of augmentation or replacement does not arise. The first official move was the introduction of what is called a short course on coding as an option in the junior cycle of second-level schooling for students aged typically 12 to 15 years of age. When the draft syllabus specification was circulated in 2014, the Computers in Education Society of Ireland, a body of which both Richard and I are members, argued strongly for the focus to be on educational rather than economic goals. And the work at syllabus development level does reflect that goal. Uptake so far has been limited, with some schools formally involved in what may be considered a pilot scheme or first phase, so it is too soon to judge the outcome. Pressure then moved to the senior cycle of second-level education for students aged typically 15 to 18 years. Suddenly, this became a government priority, with the introduction of computer science promised for autumn 2018. This allowed for a very short time frame compared with the normal one for course development in the past. A development group representing the stakeholders was brought together and has produced an imaginative specification that emphasises learning through project work and collaboratively. It reflects an approach taken by Bridge 21, a research and development initiative within Trinity College, where we both work. The Computers in Education Society of Ireland convened a symposium to obtain feedback. Much of the feedback was positive, but we will advert to some likely problems or issues later. The consultation period has only just ended, so we have yet to find out what will be approved for introduction to pilot schools in a year's time. There have been some moves at primary level, with the suggestion that work might be associated with mathematics, not a uniformly popular idea. It is too soon to speculate on what might happen.
So much for current developments, but now to talk a little about the history that led to this situation. Computer studies in England was initially regarded as learning about the computer mechanism, how to program it, its historical development, and applications in society, business, government and leisure, and primarily as an education for students rather than to supply skilled workers to society. In the early 1970s, few schools were engaged and few students got to see a computer. The microcomputer changed this, and in the early 1980s in England, the microelectronics education programme was funded with 12 million to involve all schools. In the late 80s, computers became widespread, and office applications for word processing, spreadsheet and database became the focus. In the 90s, multimedia, CD-ROM, and finally the internet saw the introduction of Information and Communications Technology, ICT, in 1997. Many teachers felt that ICT appealed to a wider group of students, permitting a creative and fulfilling use. Others were concerned that it did not involve enough rigour and depth, leading to the development of a computer science curriculum, as I described earlier.
The story is not very different in Ireland. The drivers seem to have been more heavily focused on educational goals than was the case in 1980s England, preparing students for living in the information society rather than producing people to work in the information society or industry, and aiming to encourage problem solving for all in a way that Latin and mathematics had been supposed to do, but had not. Indeed, when the Department of Education inspector responsible for computer studies was asked the reason for introducing the module that eventually appeared in the mathematics course, he said, thinking. The introduction of formal courses came a little later than in England. A senior cycle computer studies option in the mathematics course was introduced as an interim measure in 1980. It faded out over the years, but was formally abolished only in 2013, just before the press for computer science gained momentum. A freestanding computer studies course was introduced into the junior cycle in 1985. It was intended to focus on the concept of information and prefigured later work with applications packages, as well as programming and other computer science aspects. However, it too faded out and is scarcely remembered. The dilemma of providing a specialist subject versus one using digital technology with all students, and of clarifying the difference between subjects in the curriculum and approaches to teaching and learning, was not resolved, despite various attempts, and much work of ICT type took place outside the framework of the national curriculum. When the current move started, those of us who had been around 30 or 40 years ago had a distinct sense of back to the future. But this time, can we avoid the pitfalls that occurred in earlier years? We now consider a range of issues and invite you to discuss these and others that you envisage or have experienced.
When computing was introduced in England, it was partly as a result of criticism of the ICT curriculum, and this led to the elimination of the ICT qualifications. A lack of suitably qualified computer science teachers and the challenge for ICT teachers to step up to teach new content has led to a decline in the number of schools offering computing qualifications. And this means that England may end up short of the technically skilled workforce it needs, and students aren't able to access courses to fulfil their interest in computing. It could be said that the government and the parties that campaign for computer science, in their hurry to provide more rigour and more depth, have shot themselves in the foot.
The situation in Ireland is still developing and is at an early stage of development, so we pose questions. Have we found suitable content and pedagogy flexible enough to accommodate future developments? Will the high-stakes assessment process match the pedagogy? Will there be teachers to teach computer science? And will or how will their qualifications be recognised by the body accrediting teachers? And altogether, are we in too big a hurry? Richard and I believe that there is a place for computer science as a subject. It should be suitably future-proofed against changes in technology and practice. It should adopt an imaginative pedagogy and forms of assessment to match. It should complement rather than compete with other approaches to the place of computers in the curriculum. And there needs to be a great deal of support for the teachers.
In both England and Ireland, it became fashionable to press for the introduction of computer science, and it was implemented with political support based on economic imperatives and, in England, a desire to appear more rigorous.
To sustain such initiatives to introduce computer science in schools, they must not simply respond to skills shortage and fashion, but must address students' creativity and fulfilment.
So, what do you think about the introduction of computer science in schools?
What questions do you have? We'd be delighted to hear from you.